And welcome to episode 49 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. On this edition of the podcast, I'm going to bring you my conversation with my 97.3 ESPN colleagues about who really are the greatest dual-threat quarterbacks to ever play in the NFL, and some perspective and thoughts on the recent news about Disney and Sony's disagreement about the future of Spider-Man. So let's open up a cold one and get started on this edition, episode 49 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on episode 49 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I wanted to bring you my conversation with my 97.3 ESPN colleagues, Dashawn, Hendricks, and Hunter Brody. It's about dual threat quarterbacks. And part of the reason why I want to bring you this conversation that we had on the radio here on the podcast is because when you have conversations about the greatest of all time, whether it's a specific position, a type of player, a set of circumstances that allowed set instances and results to happen, you have to understand that people are always going to come at a conversation from different perspectives. There is always the subjective and the objective side of every conversation. Whether you agree or disagree with myself or Dashawn or Hunter, to me, that is not as important as giving you the opportunity to hear different sides of an argument and a debate that realistically there is no definitive right answer to. The definitive objective point I will give you on this conversation is, as I stated to my colleagues on the air, as we co-hosted together a couple weeks ago on 97.3 ESPN, a dual threat quarterback is a quarterback who performs at a high level as a thrower, as an athlete, and as a runner. The purpose of a dual threat quarterback is that you can perform at a high level in two different functions of the quarterback position. One being the primary function of the quarterback position, which is throwing the football, and then the secondary operation of the quarterback, which is, if you are a good athlete, to be a running threat to a defense and forcing them to compensate and adapt to what you're doing. So let's get into my conversation with my co-hosts, Dashawn Hendricks and Hunter Brody, our conversation on 97.3 ESPN FM about who are the greatest dual threat quarterbacks to ever play in the NFL. I thought it would be fun for the three of us this week because Dashawn and I always love talking quarterbacks. And Hunter, you're pretty much a part of the group now, so you're stuck with us.
Yeah, that's cool.
And that the deal is that I thought it'd be fun to debate some all-time lists. Because at this time of year, let's be realistic, we're not really watching the preseason for any substantive football. We're just watching it because it's football. So let's talk about some real football. So today's quarterback topic is dual threat quarterbacks. Guys who can throw and run, but guys who are so good at running that it made them throwing the ball almost an afterthought. So my personal criteria for this is this. I'm talking for my list, their career, not just one season. So like, for example, you can't judge Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson yet because they're still young in their careers. We don't know what they're going to be in the next 5 years. I don't want to put those guys in this conversation. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. We have 50 years of football to pull off of, and I'm going to about 50 years because let's be realistic. What happened in 1930 doesn't matter right now. We're talking about the Super Bowl era of the NFL. From the late 1960s to now. That's enough football to draw off of. So now that we know the criteria, gentlemen, is there any points you want to put out before we start naming names?
I just want to reiterate that this is the best, our list of quarterbacks who are dual threats. This doesn't mean these are the best quarterbacks in the league or they were the best dual threat quarterbacks. That is what we're doing. So people, if we sit here and say that Frank Tarkenton was number 3 or 1 or whatever, that doesn't mean he was the best quarterback ever alive. I know that sometimes you want to hear what you want to hear. That's not what it is. It's just a list of what we believe are the best scramblers of the Super Bowl era.
Hunter, any prerequisite thoughts you want to put out there before we start naming names?
No, I'm ready to go.
All right. So who wants to give their 1 through 5 first?
You.
Okay, I'll give mine.
You wanted to. We all knew you wanted to.
Well, I was offering the floor to you guys as well. I mean, you guys are my co-hosts here.
And we gave it back.
I'm not trying to be a selfish person over here.
No.
We know that.
All right. So my number one dual threat quarterback of all time.
Hold on.
Oh, wait, you're
Go
going
5
number
for-
one?
Whoa. Go 5-1. Build
I
the
thought you were going to go
anticipation.
10 to 5, but we're going right from
I
5
could
to
go
1.
10 to
No,
10 to
we'll go
5.
we'll go 5 to 1. Go ahead.
Go 5-1.
Go, we'll go 5 to 1.
Number 5 is the guy that Dashawn actually just mentioned, Fran Tarkenton.
Okay.
The guy had 3,674 rushing yards on top of 47,000 passing yards, along with 43 rushing touchdowns, and he did it in an era where guys could kill you. So he was running legitimately for his life, and he was just as good of a passing quarterback as a scrambler. He played on teams that got to Super Bowls. He made the Giants relevant in an era where it wasn't relevant. Like I said, he legitimately was running for his life. So he's my number 5.
All right.
My number 4 is Russell Wilson. You cannot deny the fact that Russell Wilson, who averages almost 6 yards per rush, he already has almost more rushing yards in his career than Tarkenton. He actually currently has 13 less yards than Tarkenton in his career rushing-wise. And Russell Wilson has played behind some garbage offensive lines. So when he's scrambling, he's legitimately doing it because he has to. My number 3 on this list, Michael Vick. Michael Vick is arguably the most dynamic athlete to ever play quarterback in the NFL. But even though he has almost 4,000 rushing yards as a quarterback, along with 36 touchdowns, the problem with Vick is that due to the fact that he did not balance his running game always with his passing game, he got with a real offensive coordinator a little bit later in his career. It damages his overall resume.
What in the hell am I listening to? Please continue, please.
Number 2, Cam Newton. Cam Newton has the most rushing touchdowns for a quarterback in NFL history with 58. He also has 1,000 more rushing yards in his career than Michael Vick. He's also a freak, and he's a league MVP, something Michael Vick never did. Number 1, greatest dual threat quarterback of all time, is the prototype, the original, Gumby, Mr. Pliable himself. The man who still holds the NFL record for most rushing yards by a quarterback. A record that still has yet to be broken, by the way. The one and only ultimate weapon, Randall Cunningham.
I think I'm just...
Who the hell let you go first? What the hell? Hold on. I know that was me. I don't know what the hell I was. What is wrong with you?
A lot.
You have Michael Vick 3rd on your list.
Yeah.
Behind Cam Newton.
Absolutely.
Hunter.
I know, I'm on the same page as you. I'm speechless, though. I'm speechless.
Hunter, can I hear your list, please? Because I don't know what the hell was going on the other side of the glass.
Okay.
Well, no, hold on. Tell me exactly what's wrong with my list so we can have this conversation.
Michael Vick is behind Cam Newton.
Yes, I agree. That's absurd.
That is the most ridiculous thing I've heard all day.
Mike Vick is clearly the most mobile quarterback the league has ever seen.
Listen, no disrespect to Randall Cunningham. I'm not going because Randall Cunningham is one. Listen, I have a lot of respect for Randall Cunningham, and I'm not going to argue too much that you have him at number 1. But the fact that you have Darrell Newton at number 2 ahead of Michael Vick, I don't give a damn if he won the MVP in 2015. Michael Vick was robbed of MVP in 2010, if you want to be technical, because without him, the Philadelphia Eagles wouldn't have got anywhere close to a division title. Kevin Cobb was supposed to be. I don't know what the hell is wrong with you. Michael Vick, in his prime, was ultimate weapon. He was the most dangerous man with the football that I've seen. And you're talking about Darrell Newton was better than Michael Vick?
Yeah.
At being a dual threat. Not even better than him as a quarterback. What is wrong with you?
Okay, now you're being ridiculous.
He's a better quarterback than Michael Vick?
Cam Newton went to, a Super Bowl?
Well, he went to a Super Bowl. Michael Vick went to an NFC Championship game with Algie Crumpler being his best receiver. What is wrong with you?
Michael Vick took him till he got to Andy Reid to maximize his quarterbacking skills. Cam Newton has played with some lackluster players, and he still won a league MVP. He got to Super Bowl. He has 1,000 more rushing yards in his career than Michael Vick.
Playoff
and he's played less games than Michael Vick has. He has more rushing touchdowns. He has more
They run power at the goal line with him. You know what? I'm not doing this. You know too much football. You know too much
I do know too much football. That's why you need to listen to me, and you need to stop being biased because I know you love Vic.
Biased? I love Cam Newton too, but I'm a realist, and I know what I'm looking.
Cam Newton is a better quarterback than Michael Vick. This is dual threat quarterbacks, not best athletes.
609. I'm losing.
609 403
I'm losing my mind.
0973.
Please talk some sense. Hunter, please let me hear your list.
Hunter, who's your 5 through 1? I got to hear this.
Right.
By the way, can we note that Hunter's actually a little excited to do this list?
So disrespectful.
Yeah, I'm excited because I can't
just
believe what
I
just heard.
If you say one thing I don't like, I'm gonna rip you just as bad as Dashawn and just try to come after me.
Okay. All right. Number 5 is Cam Newton, and I love Cam Newton's game. I think his size is something that this league hasn't seen when it comes to the quarterback position and how hard it is to take this guy down. Now, he does get beaten down a lot. Let's be real. He does have some injury problems due to the fact.
Steve Young.
Of course, right. But it is starting to affect him because of how much damage he has taken. Number 4 is Russell Wilson. And one point that you hit on that I actually loved was the fact that he's been doing this without an offensive line. Like, that cannot get looked down upon enough because he is running for his life.
You can't scratch ahead at 5.9 yards per carry. That's legit.
Number 3, I'm going Donovan McNabb. And I'm not even this fan of Donovan McNabb. I didn't love his tenure here, and more because of the way he embraced the fan base, I guess you would say. But as a player, we all know what he brought to the table here for Philadelphia. I know he didn't bring us to finish the promised land, but he did bring us there.
Don't
number
like
2,
him there, but go on.
Yeah, Randall Cunningham, number 2. And number 1 is obvious, Mike Vick. There is no one that affected the game the way Mike Vick did as a mobile quarterback.
4.2740.
But that's not the question. That's not the subject. Who is the best dual threat quarterback? Not who's
Mike
the best
Vick.
athlete.
Hold on. Did you watch the Atlanta Falcons from the year 2001 to the year 2006?
Yeah, he was better in the video game than he was in real life.
What? What?
Yes.
Oh.
Now, Hunter,
So much
the fact that you
disrespect.
put McNabb in your top 5 list is embarrassing.
What?
Okay? McNabb is not as good of a rusher of half the guys on this list.
Did you watch Donovan McNabb from the year? I can't do this.
Was a better throwing quarterback than he was a running quarterback.
What?
Yes.
Oh, my God. Michael Vick was literally
I'm talking about McNabb. I'm talking about McNabb.
The hell with McNabb. We're talking about Michael
No,
Vick.
I'm dealing with McNabb on his list.
I'm dealing with Michael Vick with you. The
you're still
disrespect that
stuck
you
on Vick?
the disrespect that you've shown
Just
Michael Vick.
because you like
It's
Vick.
10 years
You're a
since
Michael
the Eagles
Vick
have
guy.
signed Michael Vick today, and the disrespect that you are giving that man, I cannot take it.
Disrespect, I have him 3rd all time.
Behind Cam Newton.
I don't think that there's anyone that honestly can compete with what Mike Vick did in the argument.
Oh, I'm sorry. So Randall Cunningham, who has more rushing yards.
He's close, but I don't think
They have
when
almost
it comes
the same
to
number of rushing touchdowns.
Mike Vick changed the game, though. It's to an extent of this.
No.
Let me finish my point. Allen Iverson can have the same numbers as somebody else, but you can't argue that he didn't change the game with his personality and swag. That's what Mike Vick did to this league. So for me, that plays a factor in why I think he's number 1 overall.
No, because you're looking at him as a dynamic athlete and not as a quarterback.
What else did he do besides play quarterback? He played quarterback, so I'm looking at him as a quarterback.
But you break down his numbers. He was not consistently an effective passer, which is something that Randall was. Also, there is no Mike Vick without Randall Cunningham.
Yeah, but that's diving into it to an
There is
extreme.
no
'cause
Cam Newton without Michael Vick.
Right, exactly. Then you can say that about any player ever in any sport in the history of sports.
Let me get my list.
That's right. We forgot about your list.
Let me get my list.
I still don't like you having McNabb in top 5. That's ridiculous.
Well, then you're really not going to like me. At number 5, I have Russell Wilson. The man has a Super Bowl championship. He should have 2.
By the way, I like the fact that we all have Wilson in our top 5. So at least we agreed on something.
Russell Wilson is indeed one of the best. At number 4, I have Donovan McNabb.
Why?
The man, first of all, did you see his first couple years? His best receiver was Freddie Mitchell, and I love him to death. But Todd Pinkston, I don't want to catch a football. Billy, I don't know who you are, McMullen. I'm not even going to
trash. Just say it.
I'm not even going to do that to that man.
Reggie
because that
Brown.
man played for Reggie Brown. I mean, do you want me to go on? Do you want me to go on? L.J. Smith at tight end.
Mm-hmm.
Chad Lewis. The best thing I remember about him is celebrating after a broken foot at the NFC Championship game that Michael Vick started and opposed him, by the way. He's at number 4. Number 3, I have Steve Young. Steve Young, listen, Michael Vick will tell you himself, he wanted to be Steve Young.
Okay.
Steve Young, the resume speaks for itself. Number 2, I have Randall Cunningham, the ultimate weapon. I have a lot of respect for what he did. And number 1, I have Michael Vick, the experience of a lifetime, visor, speed, and all, at number 1. Okay, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you, but I hope that you seriously give some thought to what the hell you just uttered with that list. Cam Newton ahead of Michael Vick. If you want to say Randall Cunningham, I can respect that because I have a lot of respect for Randall Cunningham. But you're going to sit there and tell me that Cam Newton is a better scrambling quarterback than Michael Vick?
He has
Are you
more,
really
he has
gonna
more
tell me
rushing
that?
yards.
I don't give a damn.
He has more rushing touchdowns.
What's Tim Tebow's numbers? I'd love to know it because then we're going to
See,
start
Tim
saying
Tebow doesn't belong in this conversation. He did for 1 year. He did for 1 year. Here's the count. Tim Tebow can barely throw the ball anyway. The concept is dual threat quarterbacks, not one-dimensional stiffs.
So much disrespect. It's been 10 years since the Eagles signed Vic today, and he's just
Well, good for him.
So this one was.
It is ridiculous, though, to think that you put Cam Newton ahead.
I've never heard it. Please, the text. Somebody. I know somebody has sense out there.
Like, whether you think
What the
Randall
hell is wrong
Cunningham
with this
is better
man?
or not, Mike Vick has to be 2 on the list at this point, right? I mean, to have Cam
Newton ahead of
Newton,
Michael Vick.
right? And someone who's talking about longevity here, Mike Vick's career as a whole. Well, obviously Cam Newton's not finished his career yet, but
you
if
gonna tell me that
longevity,
Kurt Warner is better than Tom Brady? That's what you're going to tell me next?
So Michael Vick has 13 NFL seasons on record. 13.
He had 12 and a half. That last Steelers season.
133 passing touchdowns.
11 and a half. That first Eagles season.
133 passing touchdowns. Cam Newton has fewer NFL seasons and has 182.
They run power with Newton at the
Passing touchdowns.
weren't you the first one to say that it's a team game about 2 segments ago? Yeah, look at that smirk. Look at that smirk. Look at that smirk.
I told you about him. He likes to mix things up and use it so he can. I told you about him.
We're not talking about teams. We're talking about individual players.
I told you about him.
Yeah,
You
but you were
just don't want to
naming
admit that Vic is not the greatest of all time because you love Vic and you played video games with him.
No.
You played video games with him, so you're in love.
I told you that I would
biased.
concede Michael Vick to Randall Cunningham. I told you I would concede that because I got a lot of respect for Randall Cunningham. I will not put Cam Newton ahead of Michael Vick. I have too much sense. You know too much football. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, and that's why I said dual threat quarterback, not greatest athlete.
He's a better dual threat quarterback than Cam Newton.
Michael Vick is not as good of a passer as Cam Newton.
Give Michael Vick Christian McCaffrey. Give him Kelvin Benjamin when he was good.
Cam had
Give him that
McCaffrey
defense.
for 1 season so
If
far.
Michael
2
Vick in his
seasons.
prime was a starting quarterback in 2015,
You
that team was
forget
a
that Vic
championship.
had thunder and lightning. He had T.J. Duckett and Warren Dunn.
Thunder and lightning. Warwick Dunn and Teach. You know what? I'm not even gonna do it.
Warwick Dunn's a borderline Hall of Famer.
Borderline Hall of. So Warwick Dunn in his prime is gonna be better than Christian McCaffrey in his prime. That's what you're telling me. That's what you're looking at me in my face and telling me.
Would you agree that Michael Vick's best season was 2011?
2011? No. I
Or
would
was
say
it
his best season is 2010.
Okay, 2010. 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 3,000 passing yards.
He missed a couple games with a rib injury. Did you leave that out?
So
Did you leave that out?
compare that to Cam Newton's best
Comeback
season.
player of the year. Hold on, no, because you like to do that. You like to miss things out. He was comeback player of the year.
Oh,
that
good
team
for him. It's a
did not have
feel-good
nowhere
story.
near the talent. What? They did nowhere near the defensive talent that Carolina team did. That Carolina team had the best defense in the league.
That's not true. The Broncos had the
They
best
have
defense
the second
in the
best
league.
defense in the league. They had the best defense in the NFC.
Cam Newton's best year, he had more passing touchdowns, more passing yards.
It's a passing
Is it
league
about
now.
is it about the best season, or I thought this was a longevity thing
Yeah.
too that plays a factor?
I told
so
you
if
he
you're
likes
just
to-
looking at the one season,
No,
I feel like that's not
I'm
fair.
saying peak versus peak. Again, the topic is dual threat quarterback, not greatest athlete to ever play quarterback.
But that's not our argument. Our argument's not who the best athlete is. We believe that Mike Vick is the best dual threat quarterback.
Hold on, isn't it a definition of an athlete is the dual threat? You have to be an athlete to be a dual threat? Huh?
We have to be a high-level athlete.
Well, you have to be an athlete, correct? Huh? An athlete. You got to be athletic. Got to be able to move. Can't be Peyton Manning sitting back there. You know what? I've heard so much disrespect from you today when it comes to Michael Vick.
It's because you love Vick so much.
It's not even about loving Michael Vick. I told you I would concede Randall Cunningham. I would give you that. Randall Cunningham. Listen, there's a lot of people out there that believe that Randall Cunningham is the best scrambling quarterback of all time. But Cam Newton at 2? Bleacher Report don't even have him at 2. They're at 10. The hell is wrong with you?
First of all, Bleacher Report has him at 10. They're idiots.
Oh, but Bleacher Report are idiots. I can't do this. I can't do this.
You really think Bleacher Report is a credible NFL source?
I'm not a big Bleacher Report guy, to be honest with you. I'm definitely not a big Bleacher Report guy.
Cam Newton's not the 10th best dual threat quarterback. That's ridiculous.
According to this man, I can't.
He can't handle it over here, huh?
Second best? Cam Newton?
That's where you lost me, Josh. I'll be honest. That's where you lost me. It's not about Vic not being one. It's just about the fact that Cam Newton is lower than that.
Fine.
Is
How about
lower
this?
than Mike Vick. Or
If
higher,
I change my list to appease you guys.
Well, that's not what it's about. That's why it's a fun
That's how
sports debate.
ridiculous it is. He's willing to change his list.
It's not ridiculous.
That's how ridiculous it is.
No, it's understanding that you guys are vehemently disagreeing with me. So
we just think that you're crazy.
No, I want you to put what you believe is right. And that's the point of it.
If that's what you believe, I'd advise serious help.
I'm not going to go that far, but that's what makes this entertaining, is that it's so ridiculous to us, but that's what you think, so you keep that.
By the way, my 6 through 10, number 6 is Steve Young, number 7 is Donovan McNabb, number 8 is Cordell Stewart, number 9 is Steve McNair, number 10 is John Elway. That's my top 10.
We have similar names, I feel. It's just a different order, that's all. We're not out of, we're not out of it by using ridiculous names. It's just the order that we put them in.
I was strongly debating about putting Steve Young in the top 10. My only problem with putting Young...
You didn't have Steve Young in your top 10?
Top 5, I meant, sorry.
Oh,
I have him at number 6.
I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't there.
I have Steve at 6. I wanted to put him in the top 5. My problem was that I couldn't take Russell Wilson out. I think Russell Wilson's too good.
Absolutely. I love Russell Wilson. The way he plays the game is
I don't think that guy gets enough credit.
I had Tim Tebow at 9.
No, you didn't.
I put Tim Tebow.
Oh, we got to rip him now.
Why?
What the hell are you talking about? What the hell is wrong with you?
He can barely throw. I throw better than Tim Tebow.
Tim Tebow
throws better
First
than
of
Tim
all,
Tebow.
be respectful. That man won a playoff game. He's not.
Trent Dilfer's got a Super Bowl ring.
Joke. It was a joke. I just wanted to see how you would react. It was a joke. He's not really on my list.
Good grief.
Second of all, he won a playoff game. The man started the National Football League.
Trent Dilfer has a Super Bowl ring.
He has a national championship in college. Give him some respect.
Cam Newton is a national championship.
We're back to Cam Newton having a national, but he's number 2 on your list.
This is not college quarterback rankings. This is NFL quarterbacks.
He's not on the list. Relax. Cordell Stewart is there. Okay?
Who's your 6 through 10?
6, I have Cam Newton.
Okay.
7, I have John Elway.
Good. I like that. That's cool.
8, I have Frank Tarkenton.
Okay.
9, I have Cordell Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
And 10, I have Robert Griffin III.
So you don't have Steve McNair?
No.
Why not?
The reason RG3 is there because although it was one season, I've never seen a quarterback come into this league, not even Vic, and his rookie year and show that type of dominance as a dual threat. The guy was so good that in his first start on the road in New Orleans against the defending NFC South champions, the man looked, it was the accuracy, the speed, just the way they ran that read option offense. It was amazing to watch that whole season. So even after he got hurt the first time, how he came back and still was productive.
So you feel like that one season
outweighs.
See, this is what I'll say with that. I wish
I didn't get too crazy. He's at 10.
No, it's fine. I just wanted a further explanation. That's all.
His 1 year could put him on the list, if he was able to give us a little bit more, you can argue that his name should 100% definitely be on the list.
I would say this. I don't want you to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
If he'd have stayed healthy.
You mean if Mike Shanahan didn't destroy his career?
He'd have been top 3. If he'd have stayed healthy, he'd have been top 3 by now.
I would say top 5.
I could compare it to Derrick Rose. Like, Derrick Rose in his beginning stages of his career was so good and so explosive.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Why?
Derrick Rose had multiple seasons.
Well, that's my point.
Rookie of the year for playoffs his first year. Then his second year was an all-star. Third year MVP. Don't do that.
I'm saying if RG3 could have at least gave us like 4 years like that, then I would be so much easier to
put him in the list.
Yes, it would be easier for me to put him on the list is where I was going with that.
What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you, Josh? Why?
I love this.
I know why you picked this segment. You want to get under my skin. That's what you want to do.
609-403-0970. Get some of the text here before we hit the break. We got a text here. Nick from Brigantine. I'll give you his 4 through 1. Okay? Number 4, Tarkenton. 3, Steve Young. 2, Randall Cunningham. 1, Michael Vick.
Smart man. I always liked him.
I love him.
It's a good texter. It's a good texter.
He has sense.
He's very logical.
We got
and the soul is gonna believe with you. Gonna believe in you.
I don't know who this guy. He says his name is CM, so I gotta take him at his word. He says, although I think Michael Vick is better, Cam hasn't had as great of an offense, while Vick had 3 studs in Philly.
See, this is something
Vick
I can't.
played one good year in 2010, 2011. He was injured. 2012, it was a disaster. In 2013, Nick Foles came alive. Don't do that. Please look at the track record. I see what you're saying, but look at what you had. He was the man in Atlanta. He was basically scrambling and throwing it to Algie Crumbler.
Mike K chimes in and says, you guys aren't giving enough respect to Steve McNair.
Okay.
For a top 5, though? If we were to do the top 10 list, maybe I feel like you'd be discussed more. We were only arguing, I would say, the top 3 at one point, so that's why it seemed more critical on 3 players.
Yeah, I mean, I have McNair in my top 10.
Yeah, me too.
For
I
sure.
did too.
I
Yeah.
mean, you got to respect the dudes, what he did as a scrambler, how tough he was, but I can't put him in my top 5.
Correct. I'm on the same page as you.
But you can put Cam Newton at 2.
Of course I can. Another texter chimes in, Tom from the Villas. I always love when guys put their names on the text, by the way. Tom from the Villas says, Josh, please turn off Dashawn's mic. Randall is number 1. I never saw Michael Vick drop back and punt better than an actual punter, and Randall has a better arm.
Whoa, is punting a thing
what
here?
What the hell does him punting have to do with him running?
I said dual threat quarterback, not punting.
Listen, I told you I'll take Randall if you want to put Randall at 1, but I'm not taking Cam Newton ahead of Michael Vick. That's crazy.
That's the main point of this argument. The main
and why the hell
point
you got to
is
turn
that.
off my mic? I'm not the only one to put Vick at 100 did too.
Yeah, Vick at 1. It's not Vick at 1. It's not. It's Cam Newton over Mike Vick. That's just ridiculous.
One more text before we hit the break. Bill from Absecon chimes in. Bill, thanks for listening. He says, the best dual threat quarterback I've ever seen is Steve Young. The best run-first quarterback I ever saw was Michael Vick.
What do you think?
So he's got Steve Young 1, Vick 2, basically, is what he's trying to say.
I don't know if I could put him 1.
I can't put Steve Young ahead of Randall Cunningham.
See, here's the thing. I can't put Young ahead of Vick or Cunningham because
but
the thing.
Put Cam Newton ahead of him.
Will you let me finish? Because Steve Young had 2 things against him. 1, Steve Young was running for his life, but he was not as athletic as Randall and Michael Vick were. Like, Vick and Randall were on another level of athleticism, which made them such great dual-threat quarterbacks. Steve Young was a great scrambling quarterback. He was a great mobile quarterback. But the thing is that when Steve Young was running, guys could still catch him. When Randall and Vick were running, dudes weren't catching them a lot of times. So I don't think it's fair to say Young is a better dual-threat quarterback. If you want to say Steve is a better passer than Michael Vick, no one's going to question that. Steve Young was a prolific passer. So maybe that's what Bill from Absecon. Bill, if you want to text back in a little clarification, 609-403-0970. We got a lot more text to get to. Again, here's the deal. Dual threat quarterback, top 5, top 10 list. 609-403-0973. Texter chimes in and says, Steve Young and John Elway in the 80s are the best dual threat quarterbacks. And I thought that's interesting. He's specifically going era. He's not going all time. Interesting distinction, even though Randall played in the 80s, by the way.
Yeah, well, everything always has that conversation to it when it comes to debating who's the best, because it is true that every era is completely different. And back then, you can argue that the throwing wasn't the same. So then when you look at rushing stats, it's almost different compared to when you look at them today, no?
Yes and no. We act like that only in recent years guys have done certain things. Certain things have become more prevalent today. Like I said, Frank Tarkenton threw for 47,000 passing yards, which is more than Drew Bledsoe, by the way, which is more than Vinny Testaverde, which is more than Donovan McNabb. He did that in the 70s. Dan Fouts has more passing yards than half the guys in the league now. So I think that we can't always say, well, that was then, this is now. But I do think there's something to be said for, was someone the best of their era and why they were? That's always a fun conversation, because then you're quantifying their greatness within a certain context.
This can be a huge reach, and I'm going to state that before I mention this.
Better
but
get ready,
you talk about the 70s and the number of yards they were throwing compared to a more era closer to today.
Yeah.
Could you argue that back then it was more little dunks and dives and a little 5-yard slants, and they run longer than, say, the big stretching the field plays that you see now?
No, because for two reasons. One, because back then they were allowed to get away with more murder.
Very true.
Like
Very true.
guys were choking, grabbing, kicking, punching each other, and they were getting away with it. And if you watch Dan Fouts, he was going deep.
Yeah, that's why I said I'm just throwing it out.
He was going deep to Bob Hayes. Terry Bradshaw, when he was throwing to Stallworth and Swan, those weren't little dump passes like Tom Brady does. No offense to Tom Brady.
Whoa. Did
Bradshaw
you just disrespect the best quarterback of all time with 6 Super Bowl champions? You're not going to get away with that. You're not going to look at that microphone, speak into it, and then disrespect Tom Brady. All right, I'm not the biggest Brady fan, but the man has earned respect. Don't you do that.
It's not about disrespect. It's saying that Brady did not get most of his yards off of just chucking it deep.
He's got enough of them.
I would say the last couple of years in his career.
Brady was a great quarterback before Randy Moss ever showed up. Randy Moss only made him even greater.
So give Brady, Randy Moss, and guys like that, and look how.
But Brady wasn't accumulating yards just because he was winding back and chucking.
No, he was accumulating championships and wins and legacy.
Because you don't always need those plays, though.
But that's my point. Hunter gets what I'm saying. You're just been too disrespectful. What I'm saying.
You've been too disrespectful today.
You're just not listening.
No, I'm listening.
I don't think he said anything wrong about the Tom Brady thing, though. But in Tom Brady's earlier career, he would chuck it more than he would now. Like when you look at his last 3 seasons or so.
Brady didn't become the deep threat guy until he got a deep threat receiver.
Yeah. He had Brandon Cooks 2 years ago. Look what he did.
Until Randy Moss got there, it's not that he wouldn't throw deep, but who was he going to throw too deep?
He's not the level of Dak Prescott dunking it off too short, though.
Even Dak is kind of an in-between quarterback. I would say Dak's style of play is a little closer to Brady than it is a chucker. Well, style of play, not talent. Don't get me wrong.
I think Brady chucks it more than you're saying he does.
Now he does.
Right.
But what I'm saying is before he got Randy Moss, that offense was built around the intermediate passing game. Because what made Brady great isn't the deep ball. It's the fact he was so doggone accurate in that 8 to 12 yard range that nobody was getting the ball. And he didn't have the most powerful arm. He was just so good at timing the throw. Whereas a guy like Terry Bradshaw or a guy like Dan Fouts, I'm sorry, but you guys accumulated yards because you just yanked back and threw it as far as you could, and you hoped the receiver would chase it down.
See, I think that's more impressive than throwing it 5 yards and having your receivers run 50.
I disagree.
Really?
Because there is a level of accuracy in that intermediate range that only a handful of guys have.
Well,
There's a lot of dudes who can chuck it.
But that takes skill too, though, because you can chuck it too far. Like there's a skill set in chucking it 60 yards down the field.
Yeah, but there's a lot of receivers who make up for guys who chuck it. Remember Jeff George, 1999 Vikings, when he stepped in for Randall Cunningham? Randy Moss saved his rear end numerous times.
I don't think you're giving enough credit to people who chuck it downfield, though, because that's not easy. You can't just throw anyone back there and say, go long, I'm just going to throw it as far as possible.
And he's taking a risk because even if Randy Moss drops one of those or something like that, I mean, that's on George. That's not on Moss. So, I mean, he's taking a risk. You can't just throw anybody back there. Josh would get killed behind that line.
I don't know. I heard he's got a cannon.
I can't see over the line. That's my problem. 609-403-0973. Nick from Brigantine follows up and says, where's Cordell Stewart on your guys' rankings?
He was back by 10, I believe he was on mine. I deleted my 10-6 once we went 5.
I have Cordell at 8. Because
Okay.
I feel like the one thing that goes against Cordell is that he was not as good of a passing quarterback as the other guys. He was a phenomenal athlete. I mean, he was called Slash for a reason. That dude was playing wide receiver, running back, slot receiver, quarterback. He was doing everything. He was an incredible athlete. But the thing that he doesn't have on the guys ahead of him on my list, I have McNabb ahead of him. I have Steve Young, Tarkenton, Wilson, Newton, Vic, Cunningham. All those guys were much better passers and much more accurate passers than Cordell was.
Yeah, I get it. They're there.
We got Jeff in Delaware gave us a 1 through 5. He has Cordell Stewart at 5 on his list, which I think is a little high. Number 4, he has Steve Young. Number 3, he has Michael Vick. Number 2, he has Russell Wilson. And number 1, he has Cunningham.
What? He has Russell Wilson ahead of Michael Vick.
Yes, that's Jeff in Delaware.
You know what?
But first of all, respect to Jeff for putting his name on it. Second of all, the problem with that is that I love Russell Wilson. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks in the league. But Russell Wilson is not as dynamic of an athlete as Michael Vick. And you could argue that there are plenty of games that Vick won just because he was a dual threat, whereas Russell Wilson does not run as much as Michael Vick did.
If you want to talk about extending plays, I'll give Russell that. Russell makes people... There's no way on God's green earth that he is a better dual threat quarterback than Michael Vick. This isn't about longevity of championships of winning and all that. Michael Vick is one of the most special dual threat. Bleacher Report didn't even have Russell on the list.
Can we stop using Bleacher Report as a source?
If
your source was NFL.com.
Whoa. No. What's wrong with Bleacher Report? They're credible. They might not be your cup of tea, but they're credible.
They're all right.
This is a
they're
joke.
Okay. They're okay.
We have taken the list and made it a joke. Cam Newton and Russell Wilson over Michael Vick.
Go find me on ESPN.com or NFL.com list over Bleacher Report any day. Topic number 2 on episode 49 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. The news came out of nowhere on Tuesday. Despite the extensive success of Spider-Man Far From Home, despite the extensive success of Sony's partnership with Marvel, the news came down out of nowhere, according to Deadline, that as of this moment, Disney and Sony and Marvel cannot come to an agreement about the future of Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. According to Deadline, the issue comes down to money. Disney and Marvel went to Sony and wanted to renegotiate the deal and have there be a 50-50 co-financing agreement between the studios. And there were discussions that this might extend to other films in the Spider-Man universe as a way of including characters like Venom and other Sony-owned characters at this moment. And Sony said no. Sony proposed to keep the current agreement going where Marvel receives about 5% of the first dollar gross. Disney and Marvel refused. I do not expect to see Spider-Man, not in Phase 4, but potentially in Phase 5 or beyond in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is another example of Sony letting their ego get in the way of something that realistically at the end of the day, they didn't spend as much money as everyone makes it out to be on acquiring something that has made them more money than they probably ever expected. In order to understand how we got to this point where two entities that have made billions, not millions, billions of dollars off of two movies when they had shared interest, you have to go back into the deeper history of how we got here when it comes to Marvel Studios not owning the distribution filming rights to the character of Spider-Man, all related characters with his Spider Universe. When Sony was able to get their hands on the distribution rights and the theater rights to Spider-Man for a cool $7 million back in the 1990s. It seemed like a very good deal at the time, especially since Marvel had originally proposed that Sony buy all the distribution rights for all the characters for $25 million. Looking back on it, I would argue that both sides made out on that deal. Before Sony ever got the opportunity to get their hands on producing and distributing Spider-Man movies, let us not forget that the issue of Marvel characters in movies is something that is not having its origins in the 1990s. Yes, when Marvel sold the theatrical rights to Spider-Man to Sony and the theatrical rights to X-Men and the Fantastic Four to Fox, and then they also sold Hulk and Namor to Universal, they did it at a time of duress, at a time that they desperately needed cash flow. They desperately needed to survive a potential bankruptcy which would have destroyed the company forever. But Marvel's efforts to put their characters on the big screen is something that actually predates the Sony-Fox agreements and actually goes back to the 1960s. The reason why I bring this up is because in order for you to understand why Marvel is taking the hard line that they are about their characters, you have to understand how we got here. When Marvel, as we know it today, was only 8 years old and was the growing monster that of the comic book industry, they were still the underdog in the 1960s, despite the fact that their characters were extremely popular and that they had a higher sales rate on their comics than DC was from about 1963 to 1970. Well, it took Marvel until the 1970s to become the predominant comic book seller in the industry overall. At a smaller level, Marvel was impacting the entire industry and forcing people to stop reading DC and start reading Marvel. And a lot of it had to do with the characters that Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and others co-created to build the foundation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was in the late 1960s when Martin Goodman sold Marvel Comics and all properties associated with the Marvel characters to Perfect Films. Perfect Films was a conglomerate company that basically owned a piece of almost every industry in the United States in the 1960s. And they got around monopolies laws by the fact that they didn't own a large enough piece of any said industry in order for anyone to question them. They were more so an umbrella for a lot of different money-making opportunities. But notice the name of the company, Perfect Film. Perfect Film wanted to take the Marvel characters and make some entertainment money off of them. Movies, TV shows, toys. And eventually, Stan Lee made it his mission to try to get the Marvel characters into Hollywood. Numerous times, whether it is owned by any of their numerous owners over the decades, as Marvel actually has had about 6 to 7 owners since their inception as Timely Comics back in the 1940s and later known as Atlas Comics before changing their name permanently to Marvel. In all the ownership versions and oversights of the Marvel comic book industry, every one of those ownerships tried to sell the movie distribution rights to numerous people. They tried to sell television cartoons. They tried to sell television shows. And many of them either failed to be sold, the deals fell through, or the product that was put out with those characters was such a miserable disaster that it discouraged the next company trying to buy the distribution rights to even be interested in it. In fact, there was a point in time where the greatest Marvel adaptation for live action from the comic books was the, for lack of a better term, underwhelming Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren that by today's standards is a miserable excuse for a movie. But back then it was an accomplishment. Until movies like X-Men and Spider-Man came along, by Fox and by Sony. The Marvel characters had almost no success on the big screen, and there was no incentive for the movie studios to make any live action films. In fact, the only successful transformations in Hollywood from the comic books to any type of screen, whether it was the big or small screen, was the X-Men and other Marvel Universe cartoons on Fox TV and ABC in the 1990s. And even then, people considered that just for children. They didn't consider that a general audience consumable product. So when Sony bought the rights to distribute Spider-Man in the late 1990s for $7 million, Marvel was just desperate to make money and avoid bankruptcy. Marvel had gone through massive firings. They had overhauled their entire editorial process and their writers and the assignments they had put into place. They had technically outsourced some of their comics to other writers in an effort to try to change the direction of the entire company and the entire money flow of the company to save money while still making money. When Marvel saw the results of the first Blade movie with Wesley Snipes, it incentivized them to begin the push again for companies like Sony, Fox, and Universal to make their movies with their characters. Marvel never expected the movie industry to become the massive juggernaut that it is today. Comic book characters and action movies have become one of the biggest moneymakers in all of entertainment today. The Marvel comic book movie industry is a billion-dollar business. But back when they sold Spider-Man for $7 million, no one had the foresight to act like they knew exactly what was coming. When Sony came out with the first Spider-Man movie, the adjusted gross for inflation, it was over $500 million at the end of the day. The Tobey Maguire movies make $626 million plus was the domestic draw for the movie. Worldwide, you're talking about a movie that pressed upwards past $800 million. Numbers that had never, ever been seen before for not just an action movie that people assumed was supposed to be for children, but for an action movie that people had very little expectations for. And the fact that the second movie, Spider-Man 2, actually came close in making the same amount of money proved to Marvel what they had been saying all along, that if done right, these characters can be made in the movies. The problem for Sony is that their egos got in the way, just as it is getting in the way now in 2019. Spider-Man 3 was an underwhelming movie. It was poorly done, was poorly executed, and frankly, you could argue was probably rushed, and if there would have been more attentive care placed to Spider-Man 3, it might have been a better production, and it might have been a better result of the movie. Instead, it was frankly just a very strong disappointment to the point where Sony was considering, do they still want to keep this Spider-Man character? Well, they ended up rebooting the character with Andrew Garfield several years later. The first Andrew Garfield movie in 2012, if you adjust for inflation, made $303 plus million domestically. Overall, $757.9 million worldwide. So they still made good money. Even the second Spider-Man movie worldwide got over the $700 million mark. So you combine the first two Spider-Man movies, that $7 million investment that Sony made back in the late 90s has paid off handsomely for them. But it only made sense to allow Spider-Man, the crown jewel of Marvel Comics, the original hero that fans could relate to put him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it was a huge success for Sony. It was a huge success for Marvel. As Sony, because of the two Spider-Man movies and Spider-Man's inclusion in the MCU, drew a whole new set of fans and credibility to these movies. Domestically alone, Spider-Man Far From Home and Spider-Man Homecoming have made more money combined than the Andrew Garfield movies. $714.16 million domestically. Internationally, you're talking about plus $1.2 billion Sony has made thanks to not Tobey Maguire, not Andrew Garfield, but to Marvel and Tom Holland. By comparison, Andrew Garfield's domestic made $200 million less dollars and internationally made almost $1 billion less dollars once you factor in every market internationally, as well as DVD, Blu-ray, and other release versions. Sony's let their ego get a hold of them, and their ego is going to destroy the opportunity for fans to have something that they've always wanted, which is Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, Marvel upheld their end of the deal. Their deal with Sony specifically stipulated that as long as the Spider-Man movie made X number of dollars domestically and internationally, they would continue their relationship. But now, because both sides wanted to renegotiate this deal, Sony thinks that they can still make big money off of Spider-Man, whereas Marvel is trying to ensure that if they're going to be investing time and energy into Spider-Man, they're getting a much better profit in the financing agreement than just 5% off of the first dollar grossed for every movie. Well, yes, 5% of $1 billion is still a lot of money. Not allowing Sony to have so much say over the Spider-Man character has much more value to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I know there are people at Sony that think that just because Venom and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse did well at the box office means that they can go out there and survive without Marvel is just ignorant. When you break down the numbers, the movie Venom did $213 million domestically at the box office. Compare that to the quote-unquote worst financial movie of the MCU. Ant-Man grossed domestically $196.671 million. So realistically, Venom only made about $20 million domestically more than Ant-Man did. And you could argue that part of the reason why Ant-Man didn't do so well had nothing to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but because the placement in the chronological calendar of Ant-Man, because it was in the middle of the summer, because Ant-Man was coming off of an Avengers film, there were some people who were wondering, what is the point of this movie? The second Ant-Man movie made actually much more money than the first Ant-Man movie, because by then Ant-Man was a much more accepted member of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Also, for a lot of the fanboys, the fact that Marvel didn't use the primary Ant-Man from the comics, Hank Pym, and they went with Scott Lang and did a different variation of the Ant-Man mythology instead, probably caused some fans to be very skeptical and not go to the theater in general. Sony acts like they can do all well and good with what they have just because they have it. But they're going to find out very quickly, just like they did with the Andrew Garfield movies, that not being associated with the Marvel Cinematic Universe hurts your credibility. You see, credibility is much more important to the consumer than just, is it a fun movie? You have to give the audience a reason to invest their dollar. Tickets for movies are more money than ever. People are spending more money at the movie theater, at the box office, for the tickets, the popcorn, and your soda, and whatever else you buy at the movie theater than ever before. The reason why Disney went out and spent $60 billion plus to acquire 21st Century Fox properties was because, as they said themselves, they are investing in digital streaming services and in movies because that is the wave of the future. The fact that Sony is getting bent out of shape because Marvel wants more of a co-financing agreement involved in the production and the release and the distribution of these movies should not be something that Sony should take as an insult or act like it's a mean thing to do. They should welcome that because it's less stress on them and a better opportunity for them to make more money. There are probably people at Sony who still think they can replicate the Tobey Maguire era, where you had Spider-Man's 1, 2, and 3 internationally combined for over $3 billion. And that's all well and good that you think you can replicate that magic. But at the end of the day, the reason why the Spider-Man movies, when Tobey Maguire was in those movies, did so well had much less to do with Sony or Spider-Man or Tobey Maguire as much as the fact that if you go back to the early 2000s, there was no Marvel Cinematic Universe. The only thing you had to compare those Spider-Man movies to was either the cartoons you saw on television, the comic books you may have read, or other superhero action films that were miserable disasters. And even if you did like the X-Men movies, you had to admit, whether you were a Spider-Man fan or not, that what Sony did visually with Spider-Man 1 and 2 was incredible and impressive and set the standard for all comic book movies moving forward. But now in 2019, if you compare what Sony is trying to do or what DC is trying to do with their characters or what any other property may try to do with any version of superheroes, it's now going to be compared hypercritically to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If Sony thinks that taking back Spider-Man for themselves and moving forward with Tom Holland as Spider-Man is something that's going to work without the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're grossly mistaken. We already saw what happened when Marvel had nothing to do with a movie in the MCU era. That was the Andrew Garfield movies. There was no Marvel influence in those movies. There was no Marvel say in the direction, the writing, the editing, the production, the intricacies of the movie. May I remind you again that Tom Holland's 2 Spider-Man movies with the Marvel oversight domestically, which is your primary market if you are a person making superhero movies that are from Marvel Comics, $714 plus million, $200 million more. That's $100 million per movie. Now, some people may say, well, that's a drop in the bucket for a major billion-dollar corporation like Sony. Sure. But what you're not looking into is the fact of how much money now is spent on these superhero movies. If you are not making hundreds of millions of dollars at the domestic box office, you are losing money on these movies. You are losing a lot of money on these movies because the amount of money that's spent on special effects, CGI, on the numerous people that have to be hired for these movies, for the numerous hours of reshoots, outtakes, editing, re-edits, reshoots. You're spending a crazy amount of money on these movies. The only reason why movies like Avengers are even worth it for Disney and Marvel is because they say it doesn't matter how much money we spend to make the movie, we're going to make that back tenfold at the end of the day. When Avengers Endgame worldwide makes $2.795 billion and counting, and Spider-Man Far From Home, which came out 2 months afterward, makes $1.11 billion internationally. That's the Marvel brand. That's the Marvel credibility. That's not Sony. If Sony is really that willing to throw away easy money because Marvel wants more of a financial say in what is going on with the movies, that's just ignorant. That's just pride getting in the way. And it's a shame. Because you had a good thing here. Disney and Marvel are not in a position to buy out Sony Pictures like they were 21st Century Fox. 21st Century Fox property that the parent company of 21st Century Fox was very eager to get rid of because they were bleeding money themselves. Sony right now is not bleeding money. Do they have tons of money? No, they don't. But are they bleeding money? Absolutely not. Not in the way that Fox was. For distributor Sony Columbia, in recent years, outside of Spider-Man, they are still making money. Whether it's the 2017 movie Jumanji Welcome to the Jungle, whether it's the James Bond movie Skyfall, whether it's the numerous versions of Men in Black that have come out, Sony Columbia is making money on things that are not Spider-Man. They don't exactly need Spider-Man in order to make money. So for them, they're not bleeding money the way 21st Century Fox was. They were not in the desperate position to have to sell something in order to make a profit. So Disney can't come in and just buy them up and pull the rug out from under them and just take back their property. They need to negotiate with Sony in order to have these characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, can you continue on without Spider-Man and hope to regain him back one day? Sure, you could do that. And I'm sure there's some creative way you can explain where Spider-Man has been when he comes back, whether it's in Phase 5, 6, or 7. But in the short term, the fact that Sony won't even negotiate with Marvel's proposed 50-50 co-financing agreement, that they insist on sticking with the original agreement, an agreement that at the end of the day extensively benefits Sony for movies that they have almost little work to do with. Remember, Sony has already made billions of dollars off of Spider-Man before Marvel ever came along. Marvel is the one who has been putting the work into the directors, the writers, the casting, the special effects. Sony is just a distributor. Sony is basically leasing out their property, Spider-Man, to Marvel to make movies that they make a profit off of. And at the end of the day, Marvel only gets 5% of $1 billion. Again, it's not that 5% is a bad number, but it's that Sony is being irrational. They are literally making tons of money without doing any work. They are making hundreds of millions of dollars off these movies without the financial investment, without the time investment, without the resources investment into these movies. And they're letting someone else do all the work for them. But yet I'm supposed to believe that Marvel made a bad offer? That's just silly. Look, I get it. Venom did very well at the box office. And Into the Spider-Verse, a cartoon movie that you could argue was maybe a little bit over the top, psychedelic in some of its showcasing. I get it. They both did well at the box office. Into the Spider-Verse made $190 million. You look at those kind of movies and you say, why do we need Marvel? Why do we need the MCU? You'll need the MCU because you can't make movies. You need the MCU because the MCU will give you something that you won't have on your own. Credibility. Sony does not have the credibility that Marvel Studios does. And the moment they start making Spider-Man movies without Marvel again, they are not going to make the money that they thought they were going to. Pride comes before a fall. And Sony is putting themselves in a position to have a mighty fall. Marvel doesn't need them. Marvel Studios just got back the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. Yeah, everybody wants Spider-Man part of the MCU. But realistically, when Phase 4 is done of what Marvel's going to do, Spider-Man is going to be a luxury. Marvel is making a strong, intense transition from what you saw in the last 10 years to what you're going to see for the next 10 years. And with the focus on reshaping the Marvel Cinematic Universe, to taking it in a new direction, to let characters like Sam Wilson's Falcon ascend, characters like Doctor Strange become more of a prominent force in the MCU, introducing Lady Thor into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Marvel is doing big things, and we haven't even gotten to Phase 5, where you'll see Black Panther 2, where you'll see Blade, the new version of Blade, now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you're going to see Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Marvel has so much coming down the pipeline that realistically, they don't need Sony. They don't need Spider-Man. Do they want him? Yes. Is there more of a fulfillment for the fans and for the studio? Yes. Is it easier to explain certain storylines if Spider-Man is there? Yes. But at the end of the day, Marvel did without the X-Men, they did without the Fantastic Four, and they did without Spider-Man for almost 10 years, and they were making hundreds of millions of billions of dollars. They will do without Spider-Man again. It's Sony that will suffer, and they will ones be on the hook for the dollars spent. And when they don't see the huge profits, when they call Marvel again, hoping that they'll work with them, you kind of have to wonder, is Marvel going to agree? Time will tell. Thanks for listening to episode 49 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you enjoyed the content we brought you on this edition of the podcast, hit that like button. If you have any thoughts on this edition of the podcast, you can drop in the comment section below. Make sure you tune into the Mutant Blitz Podcast, as each edition brings you my unique perspectives on the world of sports, as well as comic book movies and television. I'm your host, Josh Hennig, and I'll catch you next time right here for the Mutant Blitz Podcast.